Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Royal Society of Medicine. It is so lovely to see so many people here. There's a great deal of reluctance for people to come in for big sessions like these because of COVID, obviously. We're a COVID-secure place, so you can relax about that. And you are most welcome. I'm Roger Kirby. I'm the current president of the Royal Society of Medicine, and I'm so pleased that you're here to listen to the fifth Dangoor Lecture. I was just looking through, David's with us in the second row there, and he was telling me that the previous four Dangoor lecturers are Lord Robert Winston, Lord Darcy, Martin Lewis, he's not a lord, but he's a kind of telly-lord, isn't he? Sir Paul Nurse, and this evening we've got Sir David Spiegelhalter. And I'm going to read this out because there's a lot of information. I thought it's quite interesting to kind of put the context in of David. Sir David John Spiegelhalter, OBE-FRS, is a statistician and he's the Winton Professor of Public Understanding of Risk. Wow. In the Statistical Laboratory of the University of Cambridge, and he's a Fellow of Churchill College. He was born in 1953, 3 years after me. And his name means holder of a mirror. So actually, that's a really good name for somebody who holds a mirror up against all the false statistics there are. He was educated in Barnstable, which is, of course, a very fashionable area now. Everybody's rushing down to the West Country. In a state grammar school, and that's also a positive these days. And then he went to Keble College, Oxford. I'm a Cambridge person, but I don't hold that against you, David. And he graduated with a BA in 1974 and moved to UCL. He was the research assistant at Brunel University and then the visiting lecturer at the University of California, Berkeley. Wow, that's another wow factor. And after his PhD, he was the research assistant for the Royal College of Physicians, and he was based at the University of Nottingham. From 1981, he was a Medical Research Medical Research Council Biostatistics Unit at Cambridge. He's been an honorary lecturer at the University of Hong Kong, and this is really interesting. He played a leading role in the public inquiries into the children's heart surgery scandal at Bristol Royal Infirmary, and, wait for it, murders by Harold Shipman. That would be interesting to hear about that. We'll talk about that later. Between 2007 and 2012, he divided his work between Cambridge Statistical Laboratory and the MRC Biostatistics Unit. He left the MRC in 2012 and then worked full-time as the Winton Professor in Cambridge. He's also, as you probably know, appeared regularly on Newsnight and the Today programme, two of my absolutely favourite programmes, and he's a bit of a hero. David, on you come.
Okay, well, thank you so much for the introduction. More than I deserve. God, this is strange. I'm just so used to just talking to a little green dot at the top of the screen, possibly with a sort of grid of blank faces and everything. They're real people. And I'm going to have to ask you to unmute yourselves when it comes to the questions. What fun, real people. Anyway, so it's quite nerve-wracking actually getting in front of real people. I got so used to just being at home in my desk, don't even have to put trousers on to give a lecture. And now I have to do this. It's very, very odd indeed. No, actually, wrong, Roger. I'm not the Winton Professor for the Public Understanding of Risk anymore. I retired. I'm unpaid now. But I'm chair of the Winton Centre for Risk and Evidence Communication, which I'll just go on to explain is a really good gang. But my other thing, which you could consider a conflict of interest, is that I'm a non-executive director of the UK Statistics Authority, which is the body that oversees the Government Statistical Service, the Office for National Statistics, the Office for Statistics Regulation, the census, and all that stuff. So I'm on the board that oversees all that work. So when I say lovely things about the Office for National Statistics, well, I would say that, wouldn't I, you might think. Okay, so I used, just a bit of background, I used to do, proper maths, and I did maths at Oxford. I come from a mathematical background until the maths got too difficult. Then I went into statistics, and I used to do statistical methodology and write stuff on probability in artificial intelligence and Bayesian methods in clinical trials and Bayesian analysis and complex modeling. I'm not going to talk, I could talk about that because the amazing work that's been done in Bayesian modeling of the pandemic, pretty well all the models are Bayesian, is quite extraordinary. I used to do that until, and this is why I love philanthropists. Oh God, I love them, especially when you're the object of philanthropy. I do recommend it to everybody. Because and my philanthropist was David Harding, Winton Capital Management, a hedge fund manager, who endowed my chair, Professor for the Public Understanding of Risk. And that enabled me to try to do sort of Brian Cox of statistics. Making TV documentaries, BBC 4, they're very good. It's very good that BBC 4 would allow an academic to host these rather than a celebrity. And do a lot of schools talks and write popular books, which weren't very popular, but never mind. And then get on television, CNN, Anandpur, and lots of stuff. And I was sort of, it was great to do a change of career. And and I was thinking, it's great career. Then I retired a couple of years ago. I thought, that's great. And then this pandemic comes along. So the other very good thing is that David Harding, a few years ago, gave us a whole wodge more money to actually form a whole centre. This is better. There's 14 of us now, of not statisticians. There's psychologists and web designers and ex-BBC communication professionals and so on, to work on communication of risk and evidence. And I'll show you some of our work later. But over COVID period, as you can imagine, enormous demand, enormous effort. Just got a fantastic paper accepted in the BMJ about with really good visualizations, showing using consensus judgments to look at the flow and the difference between sort of aerosols and droplets and things like that in terms of the risk reduction from different measures you might take in terms of protection. Really cool stuff. Anyway, never look a pandemic in the mouth. It's good for selling books, so this book's gone very well, and this one's out now. I got it somewhere. Yeah, it's good, very good. I do recommend you buy it. So COVID by Numbers just came out a couple of weeks ago, written with Anthony Masters. So basically, as you know, there's been a lot of data about. I was president of the Royal Statistical Society, and we spent years thinking, how can we make the public and the media more interested in data? And then, of course, this virus comes along and does all the work for us, because we're bombarded with, the dashboard. That was yesterday's update. I didn't do it. I should have updated at 4 o'clock. Anyway, this was yesterday's update. 4 o'clock. It's updated. Millions of people chip in, have a look at it. Extraordinary. It was a brilliant development by PHE, now UK. HSA, and because it's not just the daily figures, there's an API there, you can download the data, you can do all sorts of analyses. It's really opening up all the available data. Fantastic team behind this, they really are. But, those statistics don't speak for themselves. This is an interesting graph that The Guardian produced for us, which I quite like. This shows, over the whole course of the pandemic, the number of daily deaths. But the red is the number of daily deaths that were announced on Sunday, and the blue is the number of daily deaths that are announced on Wednesdays, which is more than double the number on Sundays. So it depends on the day that when we hear this number on the news, it crucially depends on the day of the week. Sundays are very low because people don't send in the reports on the Saturday. Wednesday, they've caught up, etc. They're hearing everything from the weekend. So a completely different picture depending on the day of the week. Now that's fine if you understand it, and I'm not saying these should not be published. I think having daily figures is good, provided that the people reporting them know this is not the number of people who died yesterday. But you still get it reported wrong. Anyway, so this is the kind of thing that one needs to understand, that a lot of the statistical stuff about this pandemic is not enormously sophisticated. It's just a basic idea of what do the numbers mean? What are you actually counting? How were they collected? And it's made me realize that that's so important. Now, okay, this came out this morning. Is it Tuesday or Wednesday? Tuesday. This was this morning. Okay, so this came out this morning. So this is, the weekly death registrations have been issued. It was since William Farr in 1845 or something, and no one's ever taken the blindest bit of notice of them, except now, 9:30 on Tuesday morning, everyone's updating their screen to find out what the latest figures are. And I could give a whole lecture just on this graph. First of all, a couple of points. This is just sort of numbers of deaths registered each week. That's all it is in England and Wales, produced by ONS. As I said, it's been produced, been reported since 18-something or other, but this is very interesting. Green are deaths without COVID on the death certificate. Blue are deaths with COVID on the death certificate, just involving, not necessarily caused by. We'll come on to that later. But, and just a couple of things about the pure communication that I think ONS have really learned well. You have the warnings on the graph, not in some footnote buried at the bottom, that these dips are just artifacts because if there's a bank holiday, the registry office is closed, and so people don't report deaths, and they get made up the next week. So all these dips are pure artifacts of bank holidays. This is just Christmas and New Year. The other thing is that the main takeaway message is in the title of the graphic. It can't be separated away. Total deaths from all causes were above the 5-year average in week 41. So that's that gap there. About half is COVID, about half is non-COVID. Now, the black line is the 5-year average. But there's lots of stuff to say here. Look at this first wave. Look at, double the normal number of deaths over weeks, but excess non-COVID deaths. What were they doing? Well, these were almost certainly COVID deaths because the dispensation had been given that the patient didn't have to be seen within the last 2 weeks by a doctor who's completed the death certificate. There was no testing in care homes. People were dying. And the doctors, I think, with reasonable were reluctant to put COVID on the death certificate when they didn't know, they'd no test and they hadn't seen the patient. But in fact, these were COVID deaths. What happened here is completely different. A deficit in COVID deaths. Where are all these missing deficit in non-COVID deaths? Where are they? There's no flu over the winter because we're all keeping our distance from each other. That's 10 to 20,000 lives saved, possibly. But also, of course, you've got the fact that a lot of people died here. Some, well, a lot in terms of absolute numbers. In terms of as a proportion, the people who would have died in the following year is probably not that great. But some of this deficit here are people who died here. What's known as mortality displacement. We know that a cold winter will bring deaths forward, and a warm summer will bring deaths forward. Also known by this awful term, harvesting, which is the official. Just look it up in Wikipedia. It's there, harvesting. So some of these people will be harvested, and we can see here. Look at this second wave, a deficit in deaths afterwards, because some people would have died within the next few months. Not as many as people might think. The average number of years lost from dying from COVID is 10 years. But the most likely, it's quite complicated, it's very difficult to explain this, but the most common length of life lost is less than a year. Because the distribution of how much time you've lost by dying looks like that, with a long tail. The average, hopeless, aren't I? I can't even got to. Can you give me someone give me a Sharpie and I'll write on the screen here. I think that probably wouldn't be a good thing. So this is, the other thing is, at the moment, the actuaries reckon that we haven't got any excess non-COVID deaths. Because if we've got excess non-COVID deaths, what are these? Are these the start of the sign of delayed cancer diagnoses and so on? No, they reckon that if you take into account the change in the population since 2015 to 2019, there isn't any excess non-COVID deaths. Okay, now, so always statistics make you ask more questions. And this is an extraordinary graph that hasn't received enough attention. This is excess deaths by place of death. It's called what's called small multiples, which is good design practice for data. You repeat the same graph with the same axes, but in different contexts. Because the eye is very good at, like different countries and so on, the eye is very good at spotting differences in patterns. So, once it's grasped what the graph is about. So the point is, that this is the interesting bit. Deaths at home. it is extraordinary, and there's been some work on this, but not enough, that there has been a systematic and possibly sort of continuing into the future change in where people are dying in this country. 30 to 40% extra dying at home. Right throughout the pandemic, there are very few of these are COVID, and it's nothing to do with how much COVID is about. This is just people not going to hospital to die. And Scotland, on a weekly basis, report deaths cross-tabulated by whether it's COVID or not, place of death and primary cause of death, which is very good because then you find out that in fact there's a lot of cancers and heart attacks and strokes there in these excess deaths dying at home. So again, all statistics do, they don't tell you the answer, they raise more questions, and the question is this a good or a bad thing? Most people would prefer to die at home if there's good quality end-of-life care and these lives are not being lost earlier, and if people are not dying on their own, and there's very good Macmillan nurses going in and so on, and the general practice support. This is not a bad thing. We don't know. So it's one of my personal little campaigns that we need much better statistics on end-of-life care and the quality of that. So I can't answer the question whether that's a good or bad thing. Okay, so just generally, it's been a busy time if you're a statistician. I think the agencies have done a good job. I would say that, wouldn't I? But if you're an expert in statistics, there's a huge demand for the media for comment. And I've been working with the Science Media Centre, which I don't know if you know, it's a fantastic organisation that puts together scientists and journalists, and we get, it means that we get the publications under embargo the day before they're made public, and we can make comments about them that the journalists can use. Most journalists have actually acted well. I've only been stitched up a few times, which makes a change. And so they've actually been very good. The mainstream journalists right across the board. I've been trying to help everybody, from every sort of outlet. And I think they've done extremely well. People like Full Fact have done extremely, a very good job. But this is, the media, I mean, honestly, I'm so naive. The media they love, sort of argument, and they love blame, and they love speculation. And trying to keep away from that is really quite challenging. I used to think, a year and a half ago, I had to answer questions that I was asked. No. Only if you're a politician do you have to try to answer a question. I'm now got completely happy when asked a question and say, no, I don't know. No, not my job. You have to ask somebody else. I think, I was on Any Questions, and they asked me a question, and I said, absolutely no idea at all. And that was it. That was my answer. And it was great, very great. People seem to quite like it. So, and Kevin McConway and I have written a whole sort of article on being a statistician, talking to the media, sound human. It takes a lot of work if you're a statistician, but it can be done with a bit of practice, I think, and training. And keep clear of the jargon. I'm not going to go through all this, but we've got a whole long list of things. Don't control the nitpicking. Beware of just a chat. Whoa. Never have just a chat unless you absolutely trust the journalist. Keep off the jargon, get a critical friend, you'll get things wrong. And I'd like to describe some of the things I've got wrong, which I have really got wrong. So learning the hard way through repeated mistakes. Okay, this was an early one. We're going right back to March 2020. Remember that? Lockdown, March the 23rd. On March the 16th, there was that important paper from Imperial, and one of the things they put in that paper, though they didn't draw a graph, was the estimated infection fatality rate, so the rate at which people died who got infected. And this was based on very early data from, this Diamond Princess cruise ship and some work from Wuhan and everything, really crude data. And it wasn't me, somebody pointed out to say, goodness me, those risks look similar to the risks that we have on our actuarial risks. Because, first of all, the age gradient is massive. Look, this is a logarithmic scale. So this goes to, 200, 2,000, 20,000 as we go up the age gradient. Enormous. And I've superimposed that on the annual risk of dying if you're a male or female, and they're very similar indeed. So back in March 2020, I said that the risk if you caught COVID was similar to the risk of dying this year from other causes. This was misinterpreted. Katie Hopkins, bless her, you may remember her before she was banned from Twitter. She had 1 million followers, and she said, fact-based tweet, corona deaths are not outpacing what is normal or usual. Graph from Professor Sir David Spiegelhalter. Because the BBC had reproduced my graph showing that the normal death rate and the coronavirus death rate were, very similar indeed. Yeah, they're numerically similar, but that means if you catch coronavirus, it doubles your risk of dying this year. It doesn't stay the same. I say it's like, saying these two apples are similar, or they're even the same, doesn't mean it's the same apple. It means I've got 2 apples. But I was hopeless communication. I thought I don't have to, I thought my communication was just great. But I should have said, therefore it doubles your risk of dying this year. Because the Sun, your risk of dying is no different this year despite coronavirus pandemic, says expert. It was me. So, oh no, again, reputation. And so I complained, and within an hour or two they changed it, but I'm not sure it's that much better. So complain. So that was a disaster. What's interesting is that the same team later on in the year, based on now tens of thousands of deaths from 6 different countries or more, got essentially exactly the same graph. So this is before vaccination. It's still true. Your risk of dying if you get COVID is roughly the same as your risk of dying the same year in a year. And this even works for this is just for age, but if you allow for other factors as well. COVID is involved with the Open Safety Project, fantastic project by Ben Goldacre and his team, where we just looked at the risk factors for dying from COVID and the risk factors for dying of other things. Incredibly similar. COVID is a really nasty, I don't know why, but it just picks on any vulnerability you've got and exaggerates it. So everyone's risk is pumped up roughly by the same amount. And that means, of course, that the average age at which people die from COVID is the same as the average age at people die normally, because everyone's risk is just pumped up. It's extraordinary, but really horrible. So, as I said, I don't know if this is an error or not, but this is, going back a bit to 2020, I wrote an article in The Guardian saying, be careful comparing countries, making league tables. You might have to wait months, if not years, for the true picture. And it's even more true now. We still don't know which countries are going to do best with COVID. We're still waiting to see. A year and a bit later, a year and a half later, we still don't know. Anyway, this is the one time, I hope the only time, I get quoted by Boris Johnson in parliamentary questions saying we can't make international comparisons. And no, that's not what I meant. I said we can't make a league table. This isn't Eurovision. So I tweeted out polite request to the PM and others, don't say this means that we can't make comparisons. 10,000 retweets. So that's the way to, get a lot to go viral, of course, is to write something criticizing the Prime Minister. And then Keir Starmer goes and quotes me, saying we should use other countries. At that point I thought, no, I don't want to be here. This is not what I'm a little statistician in the corner. I don't want to be doing this stuff. So I lowered the profile then. This year we've been, again, with Anthony Masters, my colleague, we've been trying to improve the communication about stats. Amazingly, we've been given this column in the Observer, I don't know if you've seen it, since January. I think we've written 41 of these damn articles, 350 words. Have you tried to write a 350-word article on a really complex topic? It's twice as difficult as 700 words. It is. My respect for journalists is enormous, because we're only allowed 350. We get 3 inches in the bottom of a page. Anyway, it's a good discipline, it's been a real challenge, but quite good. Let's look back on 2020, some of the things we've seen. The yellow doesn't come out very well in the Netherlands, but it doesn't matter too much. This is just some data we've got in the book, a bit of plug, stolen from other people, of course. And the first couple of slides are just explaining why we were buggered in this country. Back in March, the borders weren't closed at all. There was no restrictions on travel. So the genomic analysis people did showed that the virus was coming in from France, from Italy, and from Spain in particular, but quite late, in early March, not in February. There's a few from February from China, but basically it was in February, it was in early March, particularly from Spain. Remember the Atletico Madrid-Liverpool match? 10th of March. So this was coming in, and there were more than 1,000 essentially separate outbreaks in the country that happened because we're a massive nation of travellers. We travel so much. This was not school holidays, it was after half term. So these were adults who'd been on skiing and been away, coming back. And what that meant, and this is this bit of animation, I really recommend this, is that when the virus hit us, this is death rates by local authority. Whereas in Italy, look, it's concentrated in a small area in the north. France, highly concentrated in the area. Spain was slightly more diverse. UK, across the whole country. Bam! We were hit by more than 1,000 separate outbreaks right across the whole country. I mean, it's quite extraordinary because we are massive travellers. Now, I mean, people will be arguing, for ages about what the effect of travel restrictions might have been, but it really was, we were in a terrible situation automatically, and we weren't testing either, so we didn't know what was going on. This is another one that we just dug up. Over 90s at 35,000, the first wave, 2020, over 90s at 35,000 times the lethal risk of school children. Oh, and that just repeats what I said. The average age people die of COVID. It's the same as the average age people die of other things. But the age gradient is just massive. We had more than 2% of over 90s dying of COVID, and just a tiny 1 in 600,000 school kids dying. So it was quite extraordinary, the difference in risk by age. This virus is a real bully. God, it hates old people. It really does. Now, this is an interesting one. I mean, for younger people, the pandemic saved lives. Now, I'm not saying it was a good thing, but in 2020, there were fewer deaths among 15 to 29-year-olds than we'd expect, 300 fewer deaths. And there were 115 COVID deaths. So it might mean 400 families not mourning a young person. They don't know who they are. They would have died in car crashes. They would have died in violence on the streets, everyone going out, getting drunk, whatever, in accidents, whatever. But, that is 400 fewer families mourning a young death. Doesn't mean it's a good thing to keep young people locked up. We could make them safer by keeping everybody off the streets. Doesn't mean we should, particularly as there's been a rise in depression and anxiety among young people. But again, so I'm not saying it's a good thing, but it's been a net lifesaver, the pandemic, to young people. Alcohol, yeah, it's interesting that again, it's quite statistical. Overall, the total consumption of alcohol stayed roughly the same in 2020, but the variance went up, the spread went up. People who didn't drink much before drank even less during lockdown. And people who drank more before drank even more during lockdown, which actually means that there's more harm done because there's more high-risk drinking. So the total amount of alcohol can stay the same, and yet the harm can go up, which is quite again, it shows the unbelievable limitations of talking about averages. It's the distribution across the population that's so important. Yeah, okay, interpreting data is not easy. I mean, those facts, they're facts. And, in a way we can tell a story about them. But in general, very difficult to say what the data mean. This is a nice quote I got in my book. Nate Silver says, he wrote Signal and the Noise, "The numbers are no way for speaking for themselves. We speak for them, we imbue them with meaning." Numbers don't tell their story automatically. You can't just put it through an algorithm. And this is why when I'm talking to people about the wonderful opportunities in data science and statistics now that I really hope people will respond to, that we need humans there. This is not an automatic process. It doesn't give up its secrets. We need judgment and knowledge of the background, just where the data came from. So, and here's an example of where the interpretation gets quite tricky. This is actually rather, up to date, although this actually comes from a few weeks ago. This is when Public Health England existed, and it's just how many, don't bother trying to read this table. It's about cases by vaccination. So there's the top bit. So in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, that's the number of cases in unvaccinated people, and that's the number of cases in vaccinated people. Now, those columns are correctly labelled. There's far more, nearly all, vast majority of cases in older people have been vaccinated. So what's going on? Does this mean vaccines don't work? No, it doesn't. It's just that nearly all these people have been vaccinated. Vaccination isn't perfect, reduces the risk of infection by maybe 2/3 or so. So there are a lot of breakthrough cases. So how can we tell that story? So that's a really quite a complex story to tell, because anti-vaxxers picked on this data. So we thought this one. Most driving fatalities are wearing seatbelts. So most people who die in car crashes are wearing seatbelts. This doesn't mean that seatbelts are pointless, doesn't mean they don't work. It just means that nearly everybody's wearing a seatbelt and they're not perfect. If everybody was wearing a seatbelt, if everybody had been vaccinated, all the cases would be among vaccinated people. So it's to do with what's called the base rate or the denominator of things. You need to know how many people are in these groups. We tried to explain this about deaths 2 months ago, ages ago. When was that? June. But I think we made the mistake of, in the title, because we actually have got permission, very rarely, we write our own headlines for these articles. It took a while, but the headlines that the Guardian was choosing were so awful, and we got into such unpleasant arguments, we can write our own headlines, almost unique among journalists. So we wrote this one, why most people die, and then this is a subhead. Unfortunately, when you retweet this, you only get the top and not the bottom. And so this was retweeted massively by anti-vaxxers saying, oh, well, vaccinations don't work. I thought, no. And it was not appreciated by some. This was an interesting tweet to get. David Spiegelhalter, Anthony Masters, and the entire lying, genocidal editorial board and The Guardian should be hunted down and destroyed for crimes against humanity. Period. I thought, hang on, what's going on here? This is a bit rough. And I mean, we don't get that much abuse. I mean, I'm an old white man. I don't get, much physical threats. So Anthony was great. That seems harsh. I thought it was a good article. And I said, yeah, perhaps a bit harsh, but I've had worse referees report. So we made a joke out of it, and then it started a whole meme on people saying, from referee 2 says, you are genocidal and should be destroyed. We invite revisions. So anyway, he was banned from Twitter. He was banned from Twitter for this, for the threat. But we don't get much of this stuff. And we can laugh it off. Okay, now here's the mystery though. What about this? What about this bit of data? This is the rates per 100,000. So we can't use the seatbelt argument. This is actually the rates of cases per 100,000 among vaccinated, black, and unvaccinated, white. For everything above 40, the rates are higher. The actual rate of infection among vaccinated is higher than the rate among unvaccinated. Now, and that's from the PhD report. Explain that, if you dare, by, you can't use the seatbelt argument. Robert Peston, bless him, he's a great journalist, but he does some awful things with stats. He spots this and goes and tweets it out, gets retweeted by masses of anti-vaxxers and so on. He withdrew it afterwards. But it is quite a complicated problem. Okay, I don't know if you guessed what the issue is. The issue is, we don't know how many people are in the country. We really don't know how many people. We should know now. We've got just done the census. We will know for a while, but we don't know at the moment. And depending on your source, you get hugely different answers. So if you use, like PHE were using, NIMS, which is essentially just aggregation of everybody on a GP practice list, you get 8.1 million people in their 40s in England. But it's known that list will contain many repeats and people who've left the country and so on. If you use ONS figures, which is based on the 10-year census, census 10 years ago, with some revisions for births and deaths, you get 7.1 million. I mean, that's a huge difference. There's 1 million people We don't know whether they're there or not. Now, we do know that 6.4 million have been vaccinated. That we do know. But what's left over? What's the size of the unvaccinated group? Somewhere between 1.7 million or 0.7 million. And when you put that in the denominator, it makes a massive difference to what the case rate is among the unvaccinated group. So that's the answer. It's a complex, subtle answer. And if you use the ONS estimates, it turns out things look okay, that the rates in the vaccinated group are lower than the rates in the unvaccinated group, which is what we would expect. So this was a complete disaster. Tweeted, it's been on American talk shows, have been quoting this data with, all the vaccine conspiracy theorists have been using this data around the world. We wrote an article about it. I mean, that's a month ago we wrote an article. They're still doing it. UK HSA are still reporting that data and drawing those graphs. I was in an article in the Times today. Tom Whipple has said, just saying, I said this is completely unacceptable and untrustworthy. It's outrageous, really. We've had that one. Oh, look, I got some repeats. Okay, right. I won't go through them again, just to check whether you have been paying attention. So I'd like to finish off just by talking about trust. And it's so important. And whenever you talk about trust, you just have to go to Nora Neal. And some of you may remember the Reith lectures she did a good few years ago. God, they're really worth rereading. Incredible, succinct. She's a philosopher and really, precision arguments and use of text. Quite extraordinary. I mean, I don't usually like TED Talks, but this is excellent. 9 minutes, you get trust, you get jokes, you get Kant, everything. So she's a philosopher of Kant. So, I mean, who's read Kant? I certainly haven't. Anyway, I'm sure I should have, but I do know it's something about duty ethics rather than utilitarian ethics, rather than just trying to, do the best good in a sense. It's about duty. That's something you should do. And she applies this to the idea of trust, saying that organizations and experts and all of us in our wonderful positions of authority, we're wrong if we're trying to be trusted. We get asked all the time, hey, now how can we get people to trust us? How can we get people to trust our information? And she said, that's the wrong thing. You've got it all wrong way around. It's the onus upon you to be trustworthy, to demonstrate trustworthiness. That's the duty you have. Full stop. You just have it. It hasn't got a utilitarian end, necessarily. I mean, people may trust you, but that's not the point. You have to be trustworthy. That's such a powerful idea. It's so simple. It had a huge influence. If you suffer from insomnia, I do recommend this for bedtime reading. It is extremely relevant and important. It's the guide. This is the one that allows the Office for Stats Regulation to write rude letters to ministers and things like that, because they've broken the code of practice for statistics. Incredibly important. And its first pillar is trustworthiness. Then comes quality and value, statistics for the public good. But trustworthiness is the number one pillar. So, now this has become an obsession about statistics, whether they're trustworthy or not. So I was on 1.7 million views. So my other viral thing was when I had all you need to do is rant against the government and you get lots of coverage. It's a bit sad, really. And when I said the briefings last May, last year, were untrustworthy communication and statistics. That's when they were, quoting tests that had just been sent out rather than received back, and when the deaths were really badly recorded. So, deliberately using this terminology, it's not just loose language, it's actually being used for a precise reason. And our little group at Winton Centre tried to cook up, because everyone loves lists, I like lists, checklists, try to cook up what would make trustworthy communication about statistics and evidence. And this is, we've got a long list and a short list. This is the ones we kind of tend to focus on. The first one is trying to decide, are you trying to inform people or persuade them? Are you trying to manipulate their opinions? Are you trying to get them to do something, which in a way can be fine, particularly if it's, to evacuate or, something that's absolutely barn door obvious, you should do. But in general, And if we think about informed choice in a medical decision, the Montgomery judgment and so on, you're trying to inform, you're trying to, enable them to make a better decision, empower them. And we feel this very strongly. Now that means you have to be balanced, positives and negatives, winners and losers. Doesn't mean false balance, doesn't mean they're the same, but you have to have both. And you've got to be clear about the uncertainties and when you don't know what you're talking about, when the evidence is low. And this is the other one we believe in, but as you can see from the previous examples, I think we haven't always been successful trying to pre-bunk misinformation. Get in there first, hard first, to say, do you know there's people saying that vaccines don't work and so on? Get in there. Doesn't always work, but I still think it's the right thing to do. So our sort of, where we had to really put this into practice was when we got the data from MRHA about the early blood clots from the AstraZeneca vaccine, the brain blood clots. And so there was this press briefing on the 7th of April. We were sent the data, worked very hard, particularly Alex Freeman and John Aston. I had a conversation with Jonathan Van Tam in the morning, and we produced some graphics. And we thought, oh, well, they will take something from there. No, he actually went through them. And if you remember, he went through these graphics live in a briefing to a large number of people, incredibly important. And I thought, he's not going to try to explain this, is he? And he did. I mean, JVT's a fantastic communicator, deeply trusted. But the other thing he does is trust the audience. He treated the audience with respect that they could deal with something like this and talk them through it. And not just rush through like they do in the briefings. He took it slowly and said, this is the situation back in March with low exposure risk. We're not at that level perhaps now. And you've got, if you do the vaccine, there are potential harms, there are potential benefits. These depend hugely on the age. Remember, age is the most important thing when it comes to COVID risks. The harms don't depend on age to some extent. They get worse as you get younger. So we'd fitted a curve to this, to the MRHA blood clot data. And the benefits hugely increase as you get older. Here am I here. Well, the balance, the risk-benefit balance is pretty barn door obvious. Stick it in me. But for the 20 to 29-year-olds, the recommendation was that they don't get the AZ vaccine, later extended to the 39-year-olds. We wanted to make them roughly comparable, so we just used intensive care admissions. Later on, we produced versions with a little subtext saying there are other potential benefits, such as helping everybody else around you, whatever. But this presentation was enormously popular and went around the world, was used by EMA, European Medicines Agency, and all sorts of other people. Hugely popular, and we saw it, got pictures of it being stuck up on the clinic walls and things like that. So, just about finish off, on time. I go back to Nora Neal. God, when I say she's a soundbite philosopher, that sounds a bit disparaging. No, it means she has worked really hard to bring her knowledge and her understanding in a way that can work for people and can be usable. And she's got this wonderful list that I just repeat to myself all the time about if you want to be transparent, if you want to be trustworthy with data and information, what should you try to be doing? A fantastic list. So the first thing is that people should be able to find it. This applies to everybody, whatever they're doing, whether it's medical data or not. People should be able to get at it easily, not just vast PDFs and 300-page documents. And people have got to be able to understand it, and you need to test that. That's what we do with our psychologists. They're testing all the time about what people understand and what they misunderstand. It's got to be usable. It's got to answer people's questions and concerns. First rule of communication, shut up. Listen. What are people actually anxious about? Even if they're not things you think they might be. Oh, I learned so much just by looking at transcripts of interviews and realize, oh my God, they think that, do they? Anyway, but then that's what you have to address. And then the final one I think is really good. This is to do with very much to do with trustworthiness. It's got to be accessible. People should be able to check you're working if they want to. Most people won't, but we write our systems for cancer projections of risks, for cancer therapies, and we put all the methodology in there. Nobody ever reads it, but they could if they wanted to. They could see the exact weights being applied to each to each piece of information. So that's I think we should have a banner: accessible, intelligible, usable, accessible. March along chanting it. It's so simple and they're so useful. Okay, conclude. Stats are wonderful. Takes time and money, but trustworthy communication is absolutely vital. Without that, really, we're lost, because people can select information. Okay, so just one final little comment. Be careful speaking to the media. I was in December, I was on the Today programme. Remember, this is before they sort of cancelled Christmas, and I said that, well, raised voices could spread the virus, and my choir had to do our carols, face masks 2 meters apart outdoors. I mean, we did it, but it wasn't quite the same. So I said maybe singing may be banned, and then I had a brainwave, and I said maybe a good idea to ban family arguments. Nothing worse in an unventilated room to be round the turkey shouting at each other. Nothing worse for spreading the virus. This was a joke. However, in the Daily Express, Christmas warning: families could be banned from arguing to prevent COVID spread, according to a leading British statistician. Yes! I thought, yeah, that's a result. Wasn't quite what I intended, but I still think it was a good result for communication. And with that, I'll stop. So thank you very much.
Amazing, wasn't it? I mean, we're such a privilege to be in this room, and it's so interesting that we could have had David on Zoom and his face would have been there on the little screen, but we've had him here waving his arms, striding around, pointing at the slide. Fantastic. Well, we've got a few minutes to have a discussion, a debate, ask some questions. We're not using microphones today because of the COVID issues. David can tell us the stats of what's the risk of catching COVID from a microphone.
Absolutely no idea.
Okay, so just before that question, I'm going to ask you a question. Have you really loved all the media attention you've been involved in over the last year?
Well, you should ask my partner Kate about that. Bits of it, it's been exciting, but it's also been quite terrifying and nerve-wracking as well.
Yeah.
It's odd, you're doing Andrew Marr, people have done this, or BBC News, and what people are seeing on the screen is, somebody talking, and your mug is right over a whole wall of things. Yeah. Whereas you don't see anything. You don't see Andrew Marr, the studio thing. All you see is a blank screen and a little green dot, and this voice coming at you. Yeah. So you are trying to, give this, erudite thing, and then you realise, oh my God, my face is blown up to this huge picture on a wall of TV screens and things. So that is quite terrifying. So I have been nervous. At the same time, it is quite exciting. But I do, as I did admit, sometimes just think, no, I can't. Got to stop. Can't do much more.
So we've got two questions in the front row. We're going to take the front row first. That's where the VIPs sit. So the gentleman with the red and yellow tie. Just ask the question. I'm going to repeat it because I've got a mic here, and you haven't got a mic. So keep the question short, please. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Great talk. Is there enough evidence yet to say categorically that the vaccinations help, particularly in the older age group? And are you able to differentiate between, say, AstraZeneca, Pfizer, Moderna, that kind of thing?
Okay, hang on. So the question is, is there evidence that the vaccines work, especially in the older group, and can we differentiate between the different viruses? I'm just repeating that because we've got a mic. Viruses, there's only one virus. Okay. Vaccines, there you go.
I'm not sure. There's more new data coming out all the time. My understanding is there's no interaction with age, that the actual effectiveness is pretty uniform across age. People haven't checked it, and it looks pretty well the same, which is very encouraging. Because the young people have got a very low risk, as we've seen, older people have hugely higher risk, and it reduces everybody by the same relative amount. In terms of differences in there are some differences, but not as huge as one would make a really substantial difference between them. And other people might know the big interest at the moment is waning. Whether some might retain their the effect longer than others. And I've forgotten think that the AZ was waning less fast than the Pfizer, I think was the last evidence. But basically, there are not huge differences between dosed the 3 leading vaccines, or the ones that are being used in this country. So, because otherwise people would be selecting them, preferentially. So not a huge difference. So it's an amazing achievement, given that they're very different in the way they're constructed. It is, and the effectiveness is just, imagine the situation we'd be in if they were only as good as flu vaccines.
Another question?
Thank you very much. I'm very interesting talk, and I have watched you on Andrew Mark. You mentioned before the statistics about the vaccinated people seem to be catching it more than the unvaccinated.
Yep.
Could it be because the vaccinated people let their guard down?
Yeah. Well,
Hang on, so just repeat the question. Could the fact that the statistics show that vaccinated people are catching it more than unvaccinated people, could it be that they let their guard down?
and not just that, it may be that vaccinated people are more prone to go and get tested than the unvaccinated people, who may get symptoms and not be tested. So there are a number of reasons, absolutely right, that why the vaccinated and unvaccinated group, because it's a choice, they haven't been randomised to be vaccinated, unvaccinated, will differ in more ways than just being vaccinated or unvaccinated. Now, they try to adjust for some of those things, because there's a big ethnicity effect in terms of choice of whether to be vaccinated or not, and age and all these other factors. But in terms of behaviour, which we're talking about, like the willingness to get tested and whether vaccinated, but there again, vaccinated people may be more cautious on the whole as temperamentally. So it's unclear what those effects might be. But you're absolutely right that from the data alone, we cannot get a really unbiased estimate of the vaccine effectiveness, because these groups are self-selected and they may differ in ways that are different. So, but there's that.
You just have to look round this room.
Yeah.
See who's masked.
Who's always not wearing? Yes, I know, and I vary all the time. But there's actually, it looks like in the ONS group, even if you use the ONS data for the over 80s, that the rate of cases in the vaccinated is still higher than the unvaccinated. So it may be quite genuine that the rate of new cases in the vaccinated is higher than the rate of cases in the unvaccinated. But unvaccinated over 80s, there's very few of them, maybe a very specific group. So they may be taking all sorts of other precautions. So yeah, no, it is very complicated, and we can't be precise about this because people are self-selected.
So David, this is going out online, and I've had a whole load of questions coming in, but there's one from Mahir Putcha. He says, when the number of positive tests are reported, that's every evening on the BBC, isn't it? It's difficult to make sense of them without knowing the number of tests actually carried out. So why is this still being done?
Yeah, but they could, I mean, if you look on the dashboard, you get positivity, you get the number of tests done. So you can easily find that data.
Yeah.
But it is a bit of a shame that they don't also say what the positivity rate, because in other words, are there just more cases because more people are being tested. But in the end, the number of cases is quite a good. I mean, the rule of thumb is you double it.
Yeah.
If you want the actual number of infections.
What about symptomatic versus asymptomatic?
Well, then I mean, by definition, really, it's only the symptomatic cases you're getting on the testing, and not all of those either.
Right.
Maybe 30-40% are asymptomatic. You're not seeing them at all. So that's why the huge value of the ONS COVID infection survey that just tests everybody regardless of symptoms. And that's the only way you really find out how much of the virus, how many people have got it. And so that's where the rough rule of thumb of doubling it, which means at the moment we're running about 50,000, 40 to 50,000 confirmed cases a day. That means probably there's actually 100,000 people getting it each day. That's 700,000 a week, 750,000 a week people getting infected. The latest data from ONS came out last week suggests that getting the virus is as effective as being vaccinated in terms of protecting yourself against future infection. So that's why the modelers are suggesting that things are going to improve over the winter, that we are getting so much immunity building up, particularly among younger people. And on the whole, they're not passing it on to the older people because the older people have been vaccinated on the whole. So it's a very complicated picture, and it's the sort of libertarian government approach. It's certainly got its risks, but the modelling is suggesting that actually things might start improving. Well, I'm not going to say what's going to happen.
So we've got a question from Dame Claire Garada, who we often hear on the Today programme, actually. Not quite as often as David, I
No,
have to say.
Claire's on more than me.
David, I'm just interested in the modelling, for example, in Australia and New Zealand, and that they're shutting down after 1 or 2 cases. What your prediction is in terms of what's going to happen?
Oh, well, just repeat the question, David.
Yeah. I mean, if we think of countries that have tried to do zero COVID, like Australia and New Zealand, where they absolutely clamp down, even if there's a few cases, what's going to happen? Well, no idea, not my job. If it was Nick Robinson, that's the sort of thing he would ask, is when you haven't prepared for it, he asks something you don't. No, not. However, since no one's recording this one, it's very difficult to get out of that situation, which has worked extremely well in terms of reducing the burden. Partly because since there hasn't been a lot of disease around, there's the willingness to get vaccinated. It's a bit slower, though their vaccination rates are creeping up. Whereas here, God, everybody just couldn't wait. I mean, it was like holiday season, and everyone wanted to get jabbed. So it's huge demand. So it is going to be quite tricky, I think, to escape from that. And in terms of travel and so on, it's not a long-term stable situation because this virus is here to stay. We're stuck with it.
Professor Hakeem, question from you.
Thank you, Sir David. I enjoyed the lecture very much. You touched very briefly about the side effects of the vaccine itself. But can you tell us a bit more statistics about truly what does the vaccine do to most of us who get vaccinated? Because we are bombarded by non-vaxxers who say,
Yeah.
well, you should know that a lot of them are doctors. So how can we respond to that?
Oh, I think there's good data now. It suggests that being doubly vaccinated reduces the risk of you catching it by about 2/3, maybe 60 to 70%, which is actually kind of higher than people thought originally. And in terms of if you do get it, you don't get so ill. So the risks of going into intensive care, oh God, I haven't looked at the latest data, probably reduced by about 90%. The risk of dying, my guess, is reduced by 95%.
What are the side effects of the vaccine itself?
If you think about the side effects of the vaccine itself, we know about the blood clots from the AstraZeneca. Some others now are...
What's the statistics?
Well, there's just, the data's just come out. I mean, there's now supposedly a link with, how do you pronounce Guillain-Barré?
Guillain-Barré, I think. Guillain, is that right?
So
Guillain-Barré.
that's been
Guillain-Barré.
taught last week. There are some very, very
I'm a
rare
urologist, yeah.
side effects. Just, which is hardly surprising, really, for a strong, unbelievably effective treatment. There are some very rare side effects. I can't rattle off all the statistics, I don't know. But nothing like the absurd claims that are made about, the number of people have died because of the vaccine and things like that. So, I mean, the point is that I don't engage with that community. I don't bother arguing with them. No point. As far as I'm concerned. I think partly because if they're arguing that, they are so convinced with the right that me telling them stats, they won't listen at all. What I do believe, though, is that we should get good statistics out for the mass of people in the middle. The people who might be a little bit concerned. There does need to be good information out, but for those really convinced people who are willing to pick and choose any information and distort it, I don't bother. I can't be bothered. It's too stressful to engage with them.
And of course, social media magnifies
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
I mean, we've been reading the stuff
Yeah.
about Facebook at the moment and the magnification effect of crazy things. The trouble is that crazy things are more appealing
Yeah.
than
But, I mean,
boring statistics.
But I wish there were, and we haven't done any more, but the sort of thing we were producing with the benefits and harms of vaccine, I think there should be more things like that available to people
Yeah.
to use. As I said, we saw these things, our graphics, being stuck up on clinic walls, because I think it was a trustworthy, because it was saying, yeah, there are benefits and harms. We're not saying there's no harms at all, but for most people, the benefits hugely outweigh the harms.
I think there's a question from the lady in the very nice dress.
Thank you. Is there a statistic about catching COVID twice? Is there a confirmed cases nationally and internationally?
Yes, yeah. No, I mean, as said, if you catch COVID, it reduces the risk of you catching it again, but only by about 2/3. So no, it'd be
You don't have a statistic.
well. I don't know what proportion of somebody must have gone. I don't know what proportion of current infections are second infections, but that would depend so much on how many people have caught it before. So I think it's much better to think of, if you have got it before, what's your risk? And from just catching it before, it reduces it by about, your risk is hugely reduced. If you've been vaccinated as well, presumably they multiply. Oh, I don't know. Yeah, they work like a booster. So if you caught it and been vaccinated, whoa, whoopee.
Because there was an article saying you can catch COVID after 16 months, which is, I don't know how they.
No, you can
found
catch
this
it.
statistic.
No, you can catch it before that. I mean, you can catch it soon enough. But it, there will be some. Again, God, I'm not an immunologist, but the immunity, just like anything else, will wane over time. But it doesn't stop you getting it, but it reduces the risk.
So the vaccine is here to stay? The vaccine
Yeah,
is here to
I'm assuming that we'll be vaccinated.
I think everybody in this. I bet everybody in this room is vaccinated.
Yeah.
Almost
No,
everybody.
I'm assuming that
We've had too
we're
many
just-
questions from the front. The gentleman with the
We'll
red
start with this
tie.
forever.
So questions from the back. We've got another 10 minutes or so. Sir, with the red tie, you put your hand up first.
I may be throwing you a curveball. You like that, I know. Can you quantify the damage that's being done by the anti-vaxxers?
No.
Good question.
No. That's difficult. I mean, I think what one would want to know is, for example, how many people are in hospital and intensive care who've not been vaccinated. Some of them would be there anyway, even if they had been vaccinated, because it doesn't stop you completely. But there would be a substantially lower number. And I think that would be the best way to do it, to just look at how many people have suffered who have not been vaccinated for whatever reason, and what that has meant in terms of their own health, and, to be honest, the resources, the NHS resources that are being spent looking after people. And that would be the way, I think, the easiest way to do it. Yeah, and I don't know.
More questions at the back. There are quite a few hands going. What's the statistical chance of having your question asked if you put your hand up, I wonder? There's hands up. Let's have the gentleman in the black mask there who's... Yep, sir. I can't tell who you are because you've got a mask on.
Yes, and most people don't. You showed a map of Europe when the COVID started.
Yeah.
In this country, we were about 6 weeks behind what Europe was doing. And therefore, people who went on holiday to Europe could either pick up the virus, or people from those countries could have come here to make the picture you showed. And statistics can be misinterpreted. And I just wonder what you've got to say about that. But also, you mentioned about, somebody asked a question about the figures of COVID infections of older people. I think it's 22,000 against about 800 or 900. But that's going to be like that because most people, elderly people, are vaccinated.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. No, you'd think, but people did pick on those figures and say, oh, the vaccines don't work because nearly all the cases have been vaccinated. No, it's because most people have been vaccinated. Now, it's very interesting. We weren't 6 weeks, we were only 2 weeks behind Italy, in fact. So we had this, predictability about it. I think the statistics that is, they didn't know that at the time because they weren't testing anybody, what was happening in early March. People, I'm sure, and people have modelled to say, well, if we had, brought in restrictions a bit earlier, how many lives could have been saved, large number. To stop that, you'd have had to introduce travel restrictions in March, and there was no appetite for that at all, I don't think, to jump straight from essentially nothing to cutting the country off, or putting in huge restrictions.
Was the statistic for that evolving the last 18 months, where we're now in high inflation?
Well, yeah, I mean, things could have been slowed. I mean, I think people would, the parliamentary report says, you know, if you had done lots of things in early March, yes, it would have saved lives and things could have been slowed. But it was just not, wouldn't have been, I don't think, politically acceptable to have done that. So anyway, but that's something, again, it's not my area. That will be argued about for a long time to come, and we have to wait for the public inquiry, I think. But yeah, we do know that a lot of that could have been slowed down at least, but it would have meant doing things that we would have thought would be just very, you know, I think people would think it's unthinkable that we would just suddenly stop people coming into the country.
Actually, that gives me a chance to give a plug. We've got Jeremy Hunt on our COVID programme, 12:30 on Thursday. Jeremy Hunt will be answering questions from not Claire Garrard, I was going to say, but Claire Bainton, one of our trustees, who's going to be giving a grilling about the parliamentary report that was just out a week ago. So do tune into that, it's free. We better have one last question from the middle of the hall. So the lady with the black outfit and all the bobbles around the side.
I feel like it's a relevant question now, but with booster shots coming around and being asked, what are statistics saying about everyone getting booster shots, and how much, like, what is the gap between one getting a booster shot? How often are we going to have to do?
Oh, that's immunology. No. Yeah, I mean, somebody has obviously judged that 6 months is an appropriate time, and there's people know a lot about these things. I don't. I mean, the booster thing, it's been going far too slowly, as far as I think most people would say, because it is important, and it's really important for the winter. And so, you know, that's why they have been promoting it a lot more now. But that and the slowness in vaccinating 12 to 15-year-olds, I think it will be seen as, it's odd really, because the start of the vaccine program was so successful. It just had this enormous energy and push behind it, and it's become so sluggish.
Let's have a show of hands. Hands up those who've had a booster jab in this room.
Yeah. Whoa!
Pretty good.
I want mine.
Yeah?
That's not fair. I know, exactly.
I know there are a load more questions, but we are going into the atrium where there'll be drinks, and I bet you'll be mobbed by people asking questions there. So we better finish on time, actually 1 minute late. So David, Dangoor, without the Dangoor support, this would not have happened. So David, please come up on the stage.
Good evening, everyone. A few weeks ago, I mentioned to someone I'm going to a talk by a statistician, and they said, won't that be very dry? And I think we can all say this evening it was anything but dry, and thank you very much for that. I was delighted when Roger Kirby told me that he'd persuaded you to come and to get the RSM full of life again with people, which is becoming more and more the case after a year and a half of really being deserted. These lectures, series of lectures, are in memory of my late father, Sir Dangoor. He came from Iraq when he was 48 years old, had to give up all his businesses and start again. And when he had managed to rebuild our lives, he felt we owe something to the country to try and give something back, and our support for the Royal Society of Medicine is one example. But he once made a comment to me many years ago that in Baghdad, he remembers people were often very superstitious and fatalistic about health. And people would sometimes ask me, was it not really preordained, or so that there's nothing you can do about it, and thinking about it was a waste of time. But he said in this country that doesn't seem to be the case. Here people are more empowered by information. But I think COVID has reminded us that there are still many people who are, you can use the word superstitious or any other similar word, fatalistic, and also quite inconsistent. I think we're all of us aware of times when we've been inconsistent in our behavior, taking care in one part of our response to COVID and yet not taking care in another part. So what you have been giving to everyone through all the various talks and interviews you do helps to remedy that. We all need, I think, to understand more about risk and probability, and it should inform our lives. I think one day, I hope it'll be a school subject, and certainly you've managed to make it interesting enough for that. So it's my great pleasure to give you this plaque to commemorate this event, and thank you very much for speaking to us.
So, thank you. I think we've had such a treat tonight. We really, really have. We'll have more treats in the atrium next door. Just two messages to give you is tomorrow evening in conversation, one of the things that Simon and I have been working on for the last 18 months, we have Sir Richard Sykes, controversial figure, talking tomorrow. Remember, he tried to merge Imperial with University College, caused all sorts of issues. We'll be talking about that tomorrow. And probably more importantly, another Cambridge icon, Dame Sally Davis, who's now Master of Trinity College, Cambridge, is helping us with a webinar on antimicrobial resistance. Big problem. Perhaps that's the next problem coming down the line. You'll be on the Today programme talking about that. I wouldn't be surprised, David. No. So that's on the 23rd of November. You have to sign up for it, register for it. It's a webinar, 2-hour webinar, to learn all about the issues of general practitioners, hospital doctors, farmers giving far too many antibiotics for that perhaps unnecessarily, and the issues of resistance amongst, I shouldn't, maybe with Claire, I shouldn't have said general practitioners, farmers particularly, we don't, and hospitals, definitely hospitals. Yeah, I'm as guilty as everybody else of giving too many antibiotics. It's what doctors do, and it's what patients ask for. So do join us on the 23rd of November to discuss these issues by somebody who really knows a lot more about it than I do, Dame Sally Davis. With that, I think we can have one more round of applause for David, and see you in the atrium.